This video is called The Collapse of GHP and Mill's Rescue Attempt. The most important thing we need to notice is that Bentham's attempt to revive hedonism was absolutely disastrous. And I think you can all see why, even without me telling you. But I'll save you some time. Pretty much everybody recognizes the same 5 basic problems with Bentham's version of the GHP. 1, it reduces us to animals by implying that human beings are only motivated by pleasure. 2, it's unrealistic, since most human beings outside a thin majority at the top will never really find happiness. 3, the most ethical people in history are often those who sacrifice their own happiness for the good of others. 4, it allows for the minorities to be harmed if it turns out to be pleasurable for the majority. 5, even if we wanted to, there would not be enough time to stand around and calculate how every decision we make will affect everyone else's happiness or pleasure in life. So Bentham's ethics turns out to have a very short life, because it's a house of cards that falls down as soon as you get close enough to look at it and breathe on it. End of story. It's tempting to grab Bentham's solution because the concept of it is so simple, but it turns out to be too simple to capture what we mean by the words right and wrong. So utilitarianism, which people decided to call Bentham's theory, has to be abandoned as the wrong answer, and philosophers have abandoned it. Economists still use it to a certain extent because it's useful for certain kinds of economic modeling. But not so fast. Along comes John Stuart Mill, who lived from 1806 to 1873 in England, who attempts in the short book we're reading together to answer all 5 of the standard objections to the greatest happiness principle, although he does have to make some revisions along with his explanations and defenses. Now, Mill is not an easy read, and in fact, none of our texts for this course is an easy read. But there's some background I can give you that will help to orient you in the right direction. Probably the most confusing thing about reading Mill is that he first spells out his highest ethical principle, a new version of the GHP, and then, instead of telling you why you should accept it, starts answering objections. Now, why would he do that? And what's he doing exactly? Mill was a member of the British Parliament. In addition to being a philosopher, he was also a politician. And the culture and atmosphere of the Parliament was just as messy in Mill's time as it is now. So Mill writes not in the way that a college professor might write, with a thesis followed by neatly arranged pieces of evidence for the thesis. Instead, Mill writes like a politician who is not allowed in a debate to give long, uninterrupted speeches, but who stands up as a part of a debate, and more or less as soon as he opens his mouth, people start yelling objections. And the only way to get his voice heard is to answer those objections. Knowing this really helps us read Mill's book. He takes a position that a revised version of Bentham's greatest happiness principle is the highest principle of ethical behavior. And then he stops speaking in his own voice and starts speaking in the voices of the people who disagree with the whole idea of the GHP. Then he answers their objections. This helps us for a couple of reasons. First, we can pay attention to when Mill is speaking in his own voice and when he's writing in the voice of his opponents. Second, we can understand that answering objections against his position is Mill's way of giving evidence that he thinks should convince us of his position. Now I'll ask you to start the reading. Read the first 10 pages until you get to Mill's own version of the greatest happiness principle at the top of page 210. And when you get there, try to see how Mill's version of the GHP differs from Bentham's. Remember, Bentham said that the criterion we should use for distinguishing right actions from wrong actions is that right actions will produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people.